Warmly welcome to this breakfast seminar. My name is Annika Wepling-Korsenek, and I'm head of the Commission's representation here in Sweden. And today's seminar will focus on the EU's initiative on affordable housing. As you probably know, there's currently a strong political momentum on how to take a more coordinated approach to the housing challenges that most member states are experiencing. And in the State of the Union speech that the Commission's President Ursula von der Leyen held in September to the European Parliament, she said, I'm quoting, "Still this year, after receiving your input, we will present the first ever European affordable housing plan to make housing more affordable, more sustainable, and of better quality. And it will be a European effort anchored in local realities." End of quote. But at the same time, as you're also well aware, housing policy remains first and foremost a national responsibility and a national competence. So the question is then, what is the added value? What can the EU bring? How can we actually bring this coordinated approach in a way that it actually brings something to all member states? And one obvious link is that of sustainability. How can we foster sustainable renovation, sustainable building, energy efficiency, social investments? And we are happy to have with us today a colleague on the screen, Matthew Baldwin, who is leading the Commission's task force that prepares these concrete proposals on this upcoming affordable housing plan. But it's also important to point out that these proposals are drawn up with the help of you, with consultation of the stakeholders. And this is an ongoing consultation process. And many of you, I know, because there are many in the audience who have been actively involved already this autumn in this process. So this seminar is really to ensure that you are up to date, that you have the information that you need, and that you also know or get more information on how to continue to be part of the process. Because the characteristics of the housing market is so different in each member state that it is crucial that also the Swedish perspective is fed into the process. So that's what we really want to achieve today, and also, of course, hear your opinion, and that's what the panel will also discuss, or the speakers will discuss. But I will hand over to our moderator of today, which is Maya, who I think should come up here and take over. So Maya, I leave the floor to you.
Yeah. Yes. So no, I think I will not. Thank you very much, Annika, for your introduction. The idea is, I think everyone here is here to listen to the Commission's proposal and to the reactions to the Commission's proposals. So without further ado, I will just let Matthew speak, and then we'll go through a number of questions to understand better the Swedish position. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. So sorry I can't be with you in Stockholm. Stockholm just before Christmas very much beats Brussels just before Christmas, I can tell you. It's lovely to be with you virtually, however. And the reason I can't is, as Annika, you kindly reminded me, we have a tight deadline to deliver the first ever European affordable housing plan. And that's occupying our waking and our unwaking hours very much at the moment. Big thanks to everyone in the EC rep in Stockholm for putting this event together. Special thanks to Annika for making that kind introduction, to Maya, to Vilma, to Adam, and to Lars Svensmark, who sounds pretty Swedish to me, but he's actually Danish, and he's working in our task force, and I'm delighted to have him. I think, as you said, we are here really to listen to you. We call 2025 the year of the affordable housing dialogues. And we've really tried to reach out in an unprecedented way right across the Union to hear people's views about this housing crisis, which in many ways is manifest in every member state of the Union, but often in very different ways, reminding us that we have 27 very different housing markets and very different housing traditions. And it's certainly not for the Commission to step in and say, right, this is how everything's going to be from now on. But just a word perhaps on that consultation exercise that Annika, you alluded to. We've been working very closely with the European Parliament, which has set up a special committee, the House Committee. I don't know where they got that name from, which has been looking across the year, holding a series of dedicated hearings at different aspects of the housing crisis, which we've supported and coordinated with them. Shone an incredible light, I think, on the whole process. We've been working with the Economic and Social Committee, the Committee of the Regions, all the different institutions in a very big reach out. We had then our open public consultation, which closed last month, although we're still open to views of all kinds. That produced 13,000 reactions. And sometimes you get these big numbers in consultation exercises, which reflect one or two organizations making a big campaign. With one or two little exceptions, this seems to have come from citizens up and down, right across the Union, making their views known. And helping us really address the question of how we step onto the pitch when, as Annika said, this is one of those key questions for subsidiarity. It's a member state competence, sometimes a regional competence, sometimes a city competence to provide housing. And as you said very well, Annika, our job in this situation is to try to add European value. Certainly not to come in with what I like to call the long Commission wagging finger. This is how it's going to be from now on. But to listen to everybody involved, to see where the pinch points are, firstly to analyze the crisis, and then try to come forward with useful European ideas. And you quoted, you beat me to it, Annika, that quote you gave of the president really captures it. She said in different occasions, if this is an issue which concerns European citizens, then it needs to be an issue which concerns Europe. But then she went on to say, a European effort, as you said, anchored in local realities. We are not trying to change those local realities, we're trying to help. Let me quickly say where we've got to then in terms of our plan. It's been a race to deliver it. I think we will be there for mid-December. It's not a publicly announced date yet, but many people have a landing point for this. So we're well underway with our preparations. I think our plan, the way I'd characterize it, is it aims to be the starting point for future discussion, not the end point. I'd love it if, after we publish our plan, everyone says, Eureka! The Commission has identified everything that needs to be done. We can just implement the plan. That's fantastic. I somehow doubt that that will be the case. It is very action-oriented. We're dividing the analysis into 4 pillars of work around supply, all those issues relating to finance for housing, where reforms are needed, and again, thinking broadly here about the European semester process and limiting our legislative efforts to really the minimum. And then last but not least, looking at the groups of people who are most affected by the crisis and whether we need to look at particular measures in those areas. So let me say a few words about each of those. On supply, I know this is a big concern in Sweden, and we've read very carefully the Swedish government response and indeed a number of other very useful documents. So I'm very glad that Sweden has really engaged in this process. The construction industry is struggling. It, as a sector, has had lower productivity growth than agriculture over the last couple of decades. It's struggling to adopt the new techniques, off-site, modular, digitalization, really looking at the ways in which we can build and renovate faster and more efficiently, and particularly in cities where it's not only where the squeeze is tightest, but the disruption from construction efforts is often felt most severely. Allied to this is a problem on skills. I know that's an issue which has also been identified in Sweden. So with our colleagues in DG Grow, we've been looking at a package of measures around construction, which will be the European Housing Construction Strategy. That will also be coming out, I'm delighted to say, in mid-December as part of our package. Linked to, of course, supply is the question of finance. There is an investment gap. We've seen investment declining in the housing industry over the last couple of decades. Again, that's counterintuitive with what is needed. And we're looking at this in a number of different ways. Firstly, we're looking at in terms of the rules which the European Union or the Commission sets for or to sort of channel member state spending in strategic areas, what we call the state aids rules. And here there's been quite a lot of criticism that the current rules are too inflexible. For example, member states can spend money on social or public housing without too much limit. But if they wanted to also address a different sector, below market rents, for example, but aimed at a group of people who don't normally qualify for social or public housing, teachers, social workers, policemen, firefighters, then they were finding their hands controlled by the existing state aid rules. So with our colleagues in DG Competition, we've taken a hard look at those. Again, massive consultation exercise to see what would best serve the interests of the sector. And there are concerns from the social housing community that it shouldn't diminish the amount of money that's going to social housing, or indeed that money that comes to this new affordable housing category shouldn't then end up within just a few years in housing for luxury developments, for example. So the idea of what's called the revolving fund, trying to keep those funds in the social, public, affordable sector. But these rules are also well underway. The final preparations are underway for the changing of the rules, and we expect those also to be part of the package. Looking at it more broadly, the question of finance, we know that all the public financing, the finance that the member states, that the European Union can bring together, can only be a drop in the ocean of the total needed to support affordable housing. So we've been putting together something with a rather grand European title, but we aim it to be a very pragmatic and inclusive device. It's called the Pan-European Investment Platform. We'll describe exactly how this is going to work in our package on the 16th. And we've been working very closely with the European Investment Bank, but also with national and regional promotional banks to see how we can work better together to provide housing finance. As a group, for example, the national promotional banks in 2024 are invested around 75 billion euros in housing and social and affordable housing across the European Union. That's an enormous amount of firepower. And of course, not all of that by any means would be coming through the Pan-European Investment Platform, but I think it's an indication that if we work together, and the European Investment Bank has also been doing so much in this area, we can start to make a real difference. And we can do what's called the crowding in of private investment, using the public money we have through guarantees and through other mechanisms to draw in more private money to support new construction, but also renovation. Turning to the reform side, as many of you will know, we have this thing called the European semester, which has been looking periodically at housing in the past, including, I believe, in Sweden. And we want to make those efforts much more systematic. And this speaks to a much bigger issue tied up with subsidiarity. If it's not for the Commission to tell everyone what to do, it is to try to provoke ways in which the member states can learn better from each other, from cities discussing how they're addressing their housing crisis. The more we can bring people together through informal or formal networks to learn from each other, we can trigger the best types of reforms that are needed in different housing markets. We're also looking very closely at issues related to short-term rentals. I know that's a big issue in big cities like Stockholm, for example, where the people, again, the teachers, the social workers that they're trying to live in the cities they serve are often finding it almost impossible to find affordable accommodation. And we've been having a long discussion inside the House as to what we can do to provide more legal clarification. And indeed, the President made a commitment in her speech in September to say there would be a new legal initiative coming on short-term rentals. But we're also looking in a broader sense at how we can help cities address this whole question. And then last but not least, and I really don't want to take up too much time because I want to listen to you in the, I'm afraid, the short hour I can be with you today, looking at the groups that are most affected by the crisis. If you look at the whole crisis across the board, in averages, it's maybe not so bad. The situation, if you really net it out across the 27 member states, you're not seeing everywhere all the time huge rises in house prices or in rents. However, in a number of stressed areas in cities and on touristic hotspots, there are real problems. And that's, of course, predominantly affecting young people. If you had to hone it into one group, it's young people in cities who are struggling the most. And so we do want to take a hard look at the problems facing young people, the issues facing students, often finding it impossible to take up university places or having to drop out of university because they can't afford to pay the rent. We've taken a very hard look at that, and I think we'll be coming with some interesting ideas on that. And then last but not least, the most vulnerable of all in our society. Again, often young people, often in cities, and that's the homeless. And we already have European action to address homelessness through the European platform on combating homelessness. But we think it's time to take another hard look at that and to see what more we can do to support it. If my boss, Dan Jornsen, were here, he would tell you he finds it a moral scandal that in the 21st century we have so many people living without homes in Europe, more than 1 million by most counts, and 400,000 children affected. So we do have to take a hard look and make sure that we're bringing everybody on board. We need to see affordable, sustainable, and quality housing for everybody, and we need to work together to that end. So watch this space for more development of networks at official level, at city level, at political level. We had the first discussion in the European Council in October between heads of state and government, a productive and I think an encouraging discussion from those I've heard from those who were present. And the president of the European Commission has proposed indeed the first ever summit dedicated to housing, and we anticipate that taking place in the middle of 2026. So once again, I think when we come out with our plan in mid-December, that will be the starting point for further activities. We've seen the Council has given us very strong conclusions. The European Parliament will come out shortly afterwards with its report as well. We want to take this back to the people, to really discuss with everyone, to make sure that everyone has had their say, to make sure we haven't missed an opportunity to do the best we can to support everyone's efforts on housing, and at the same time, of course, to hear your views on where you don't want us to come in and where we have to be more careful in limiting our actions. So that's very much the spirit of today's event. Once again, my thanks to our colleagues in the Commission in Stockholm for putting this on. Delighted to see so many of you there. And now I think it will be the right time for me to stop, to listen to the very good panel that's been assembled, and to be ready to answer any questions that you have, or indeed listen to your comments. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Matthew, for your presentation. I wanted to explain a bit as well the context which is related to what Matthew called the European semester, or the fact that we write a report on the housing sector. Up until now, we have concentrated essentially on the macroeconomic dimension of the housing sector, and the colleagues who are responsible for a report which is called In-Depth Review are actually here this week, so this is also a bit why the date was chosen. Yesterday, Sweden was identified again as a country that had macroeconomic imbalances related to the housing sector, so it's a recurring issue. What is interesting now with this initiative on the Affordable Housing Task Force is that it's not only a package, in my view, that comes up in the middle of December. It's something that we're going to continually monitor every year in a way which is broader than the macroeconomic. So the macroeconomic dimension will remain because it's something which is very structural. But on top of that, we'll have new indicators, new ideas of best practices between countries. So it's an emerging area. So watch out. In June this year, we'll come up with this country report that we produce every year, which comes in addition to the other report, which is concentrating only on the macroeconomic dimension. So it was just a short explanation on the product we work with here as well as the representation, together with the colleagues in Stockholm. And we are very happy to have today 3 prominent speakers who have a lot of knowledge on the Swedish housing sector, and who as well understand well the proposal of the Commission and will help, I think, the Swedish public opinion shape itself and help people in Sweden position themselves towards what Matthew has presented. Marie Linder is president of the Swedish Unions of Tenants, but she also has a role globally. She's also the voice for the tenants at international level. So she has a long background in tenant advocacy and social policy. So we really look forward to knowing what Marie thinks about this proposal. We will also listen to Martin Grander, who is associate professor in urban studies at Malmö University. He's concentrating on housing policy, welfare system, segregation. I've read with lots of interest his research, which gives a very good historical perspective on the history of not only social policy, but really housing policy in Sweden. And Fredrik Kopsch, chief economist at the Swedish think tank Timbro, who holds a PhD in real estate economics, and who comes up with more radical ideas. So I think it will make the conversation very dynamic. So I will let now our panel discussant come in with Marie first, and then Martin and Fredrik.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Matthew, for I think it's so important that we have a discussion about the housing situation, and I must say it's more active on the European level than it is here in Sweden. It's crazy because it's a question that affects everyone everywhere in Sweden. And I must start to say I think it's so important that this affordable housing plan becomes a plan that is an issue for the European Commission and the European Union, but it's a national competence. I think it's so important that it stays like that. And especially in the Swedish context, where tenants has long-term contract, we also have the right as tenants, and we also have the right to negotiate our rents. And that is important because if you start, what is the most important thing is that housing is a human right. I think you have to have that base. You have to look at housing in that question. But it's also important that people of their disposable income don't have to pay too much. We have the Swedish Union of Tenants, we say 25% of your disposable income. And the Statistics Sweden last week came with figures for all the different kind of I forgot the word. Housing types, great. And as a tenants, we pay 27% of our income in general, compared to homeowners has 18%. And there we have some tax issues. We want to see more balance tax situation between homeowners and tenants. Today we have an equally between tenants and homeowners, and that is one thing that is important. But I will also say that we have something that is very unique for Sweden. We don't have social housing. We made a choice after the Second World War. We had tried social housing, but we decided that we should have public housing. And the public housing is open for everyone, And I think when we talk also about integration, that is a very good thing to have public housing, because we live nearby each other in different kinds of, if you're a nurse or a single mom, or if you're a CIO or something like that. That's, I think, is very important. But also, I will say, if I talk for the rental sector, also the private landlords they are professional, and it's also important that we have the right to negotiate the rents both in the public sector and in the private sector. Then we will have to say we have a problem with housing prices in the construction sector. I don't know if we have the highest prices in Europe, or we are the second one, but that is a problem. And I say, when I meet people, politicians here in Sweden, this is the biggest questions. How should people could afford the houses? And I would like to see a more active state, but I also think it's good that we could change the state aid rules, but you can't change the way how we have solved the housing situation in Sweden. It needs to be adapted to that. Then I say.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for letting me comment on this very important package. So thank you, Matthew, also for the presentation. I was wondering about what are the relevance of those suggestions for Sweden. And to start with, I think this is very important, that the housing question, as Marie said, is actually lifted as a central concern on the European level, because the debate about housing in Sweden is insufficient, to say the least. So I think this is, of course, an urgent issue. We see a lot of inequalities in housing, which also will affect especially young people's future life chances. So the inequality that the housing system actually develops and further strengthens is of central concern. So I am very glad that this is happening. I'm very glad to see that this will foster perhaps an exchange of knowledge between member states, which I think is really, really good. So we could discuss issues of affordability, the financialization, which is of central concern here also, but also livability of cities and neighborhoods in the broader sense. So when thinking about what the actions of this package will be most relevant for Sweden, I was immediately drawn to the idea of changed state aid rules. The state aid rules and the revision of them have, as many of us know, had a large impact on Sweden 10 years ago. Or more than that, actually, it's 15 years ago right now, where we had new legislation for the public housing, which was a direct consequence of changes in the state aid rules. So this is a new approach on the state aid rules. Although I think that the widened scope of state aid rules might be of very central concern for Sweden, there is a need to modernize the Swedish system. So I think this is very important and could be of potential change in Sweden. But my impression is that we will see quite limited impact of this discussion in Sweden. Even if the state aid rules are decided upon, my view is that the interest for using or actualizing this state aid in Sweden is limited among politicians and among the leading actors on the rental market, the property owners, the tenants union, and the Swedish public housing. And the reasons for this are two, I would say. First and foremost, we have this universal housing system. I would say that we are perhaps, alongside Denmark, perhaps the only remaining universal system in Europe. And I think when reading the drafts for the SGEI suggestion, that these changes, although they are welcome in my point of view, are insufficiently adapted to the Swedish system. So there is, as many of us know, a certain reluctancy towards needs testing in housing. And even if we broaden the scope of this group, I would say that the stigma and well, I could say it's a taboo to talk about public housing, social housing in Sweden. I think this will still become a problem for implementing changes in Sweden. I think there is a general agreement that the Swedish housing system and the universal model is not sufficient. It's not working. We are leaving so many people outside, especially young people, this squeezed middle, which is of central concern for the European Union here, the middle income, low middle income earners who are excluded from both the market system and the social services in Sweden. This is a growing group and a group of central concerns. So I think we are absolutely right in trying to focus on this group and finding new solutions. But still, I think that the way that the changes in state aid rules are presented, I think there is too much of reluctancy among Swedish actors to actually implement and welcome this. So I see a large problem here. So I'm not saying that this is a bad idea. I think it's a good idea to think about this, but it needs to be more and better adapted to the Swedish system. As a researcher, I say that we have a universal system. Yes, we do have a universal system, but it's depending on certain selective instruments. And it's had always been like that in Sweden. So I would suggest that the state aid rules would better be adopted to actually strengthening those selective systems within the universal systems in Sweden. So I would like to see a better connection to the member states' specificities, and in this case then Sweden and the universal model. So that's the first one, my first concern. The second concern is that there is a general reluctancy towards subsidies at any kind in Sweden right now. I mean, we have had a universal subsidy until recently, the investeringsstöd for constructing new rental apartments. This led to a lot of new housing construction, but the debate is whether this is houses should be built anyway or not. And this is an ongoing debate, and also that those cheaper apartments are, of course, then universal, meaning that they could be applied for the one with the shortest waiting time. Doesn't really mean that the people with low income get them, so to speak. So there is a general reluctancy to subsidies in Sweden. I think that should also be a concern when discussing the changes in state aid rules. So I think I'll stop there and might come back.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Let's see if I can give you some radical ideas. I might. But first, a few comments on the suggestions, and thanks for the presentation. It was very interesting. I think, I mean, it's difficult to design a policy for all member states, because you easily find yourself in a sort of one-size-fits-all policy suggestions. Where I think, I mean, there are a few things that I don't think would work very well in the Swedish context. So, for example, the legislation on short-term rentals, I don't see that it's a very big problem or a problem at all in the Swedish context. I understand that it is in Spain. I visited Barcelona last summer, where residents seemed quite annoyed about tourism, because there you have an outcrowding effect on the housing market, where a lot of rentals go on Airbnb rather than long-term rentals. So that's not an issue in Sweden. And I also think, so to tie into the state aid rules, I agree with Martin that I don't think that it would generate that much effect in Sweden, because there is a reluctancy, as we've spoken about, towards social housing. I'm a proponent of social housing. I think it would be, I mean, if we say we want to help people with lower incomes who have difficulties getting into the housing market, well, then that's a pretty effective way to help them get into the housing market, rather than to pretend that our current system is working, which is not. And I think if you would broaden that perspective to say not only low-income people, but sort of the middle range, I don't see how it would change. I don't think that Marie would change her opinion and say that that's fine, but social housing is not, so you will still work against it, and most actors probably would. But there is a bigger issue in changing the state aid rules for the Swedish context, since we have these rather big influence of public housing companies, which is not that common in other countries, at least not at that dominant level. In some municipalities, they own the majority of rentals. That you introduce a difficulty in competing for the private sector, which I would not like. So my first radical idea is to abolish public housing in Sweden. I don't see the point in public housing at all if you don't have it as social housing. If you don't have it as a mean of redistribution, I don't see a point in government or the public sector involving in the housing market at all. But then let me just tie into a few of the other problems, because the third thing that was mentioned during the presentation is the difficulties for young people. And the difficulties for young people to get into the housing market is rather different between member states. In some countries, it's difficult to find rental apartments in central cities because it's not difficult to find them; they're just very expensive. So if you would like to move to Paris, for example, and you would like to live in a central Paris apartment, which everyone wants, with a view of the Eiffel Tower, it's going to be extremely costly, and most young people are not going to afford to live there. In the Swedish context, that's not the case, because rental apartments in central cities, so central Stockholm, where we are now, are extremely affordable. They're very, very cheap if you can find one. The problem is that we have a waiting line to get those rental apartments, and currently, if you want to have a rental apartment in this neighborhood or within a few kilometers, the average waiting time is 20 years. Obviously then, for young people, that's rather difficult. You can only get in line when you're 18, so you do the math, you have to be at least 38 to get a rental apartment. And that waiting time is steadily increasing. So I did a report a few years ago, or 1.5 years ago, looking at how has waiting times developed since 1994. In 1994, it took you on average 7 years to get a rental apartment in central Stockholm. That's a rather long time. Now it's 20 years. The average age of a new tenant has increased from 30. So an average tenant were 30 years old in 1994. Now they're 50 in central Stockholm. That's obviously a huge problem for young people. And the problem is, and we've seen this in other countries that have tried, recently Germany, which also introduced rent controls. The first thing you see every time that happens is a shortage of housing, which is exactly what we have. So a second, it's not a radical idea, economists have proposed it since the 1940s, since we introduced rent controls, is to abolish rent controls. I think that would be beneficial. And the third point, if I have some time, we might have drawn over already. I think we got 4 minutes, right? Is the financing, which we've touched upon, or Martin touched upon. There is no clear evidence that it helps. So the argument is always that there are special groups that need help, and that's the argument here as well. But then the proposed solutions are typically not catered to helping that group. So subsidizing housing does not necessarily mean that young people will move into that subsidized housing, because older people like myself with very high incomes, I'm also interested in paying less for my housing. So if I would get a chance to pay less, and 43 years old, I'm more likely to have a long waiting time. And if we distribute subsidized apartments through waiting time, then I'll move into them, not young people.
Thank you very much. So Matthew, we've heard that there are very polarized views on how to reform the Swedish housing system. Everybody agrees that basically access to housing is problematic for the categories you had mentioned, Matthew. Do you want to react on this very Swedish perspective of the housing sector, and what's your perspective, knowing that you have basically looked at 27 countries at the same time?
Well, thank you very much indeed. I mean, I'm really grateful to all of the speakers, because I mean, you say almost apologetically, it's a very Swedish perspective. Well, yeah. You're in Sweden, and that's the that's the essence of the exercise. And later on this morning, I should be talking to the Slovenian folks, and they have a Slovenian perspective. And our job is not to try to say, you know, you guys listen up, you should do it the European way. It is to try to produce things. I think someone said that are not trying to be one size fits all, but one size helps all, if you like. What proposals put on the table can facilitate what you're trying to achieve in Sweden. I thought all of your thoughts were very relevant and thought-provoking. Marie, it's good to see you again. We've been talking a lot with the tenants associations from right across Europe. We know the anxieties, and I would say that affordability issues are most pertinent in the rental sector, not just. If you look at Eastern Europe, it can be you have a lot of problems for owner-occupiers. But we're very cognizant of this, and I don't want to say more now because I don't want to anticipate everything that's in the plan, but we are looking at some specific things to try to address the concerns of tenants up and down Europe. Martin, your comments very interesting, well made as well. You also raised the question, which I omitted to touch in my presentation, about the concerns around financialization and speculation. And I'll come back to that in a moment. On the state aid rules, I hear you, and indeed, I understand the different soundings that have been taken. The state aid changes that are being discussed are possibly not so relevant to Sweden. Just two comments on that, if I may. Firstly, of course, no one is requiring member states to spend money to use the state aid rules. They're voluntary. In other words, and permissive, I would put it. What we're trying to do is broaden the category where spending is possible from a narrow focus on social housing, and I know that there's an issue of definition there also in Sweden, into a slightly broader category. So if Sweden at some time did want to invest money to support housing, for example, for police, for folks who don't qualify for public housing, and I don't pretend to understand all the intricacies of the Swedish housing market, by the way, then this would be more possible. And so what we're trying to do is, and I think this is the theme I'm trying to show here, we're trying to facilitate member states to do things, not require them to do things. Your point about subsidies, I think, is well understood. Generally speaking, subsidies or other big interventions in the market, someone mentioned rent controls, they can have an impact on supply. And again, we're not going to be saying much about that because these are issues we think are properly for member states to consider. But we do see, particularly when we've discussed these issues in the European semester context, that rent controls or interventions of this kind should be short-term and proportionate and very carefully targeted at what they're trying to achieve, rather than wholesale, because the other impact that they can have then is to drive up prices or indeed to reduce supply. To Fredrik, your comments, short-term rental legislation not relevant. Well, wait and see would be my first comment. We haven't announced yet what kind of types of measures we will bring forward. But I think, because we've talked about it quite publicly, one of the issues we're facing is, again, facilitating, enabling cities, if they face difficulties, to act, to address the issues of short-term rentals, without being constrained on that. The mayors, or unduly constrained, I should say. I mean, the mayors across Europe, they're big girls and boys. They often themselves can draw the conclusions as to the balance they want to strike between, for example, tourism on one hand and making sure that homes are available for their residents at affordable prices. Sometimes within a city, you want a mixture of both. And again, I think there are concerns that have been expressed to me that the way European rules relating to the Services Directive have applied have constrained cities from being able to make those choices to respond to their voters. But again, watch this space. I very much hear you on the problems of young people. And I do hear that sometimes in some cities, it is simply just an unavailability. You mentioned the waiting list in Stockholm. I don't think that's an exception. In often places, housing is just not available for students. My son, who's studying in Rome, and he's lucky enough to have a room there, and he just gets calls from people saying, "Can I just sleep on your floor? Because I need to finish my course and I cannot find anywhere to live." And this is all comes back to the issues around vacancies and vacant buildings. And I think this is a very good symbol for sometimes how you can have divergent explanation for what's going on. For example, Paris has a 20% vacancy rate, or an effective vacancy rate, buildings that are just not used. And if you like, on the right of the political spectrum, there is the explanation, this is because of over-regulation of the sector and people are not ready to put these properties onto the market. And on the left of the political spectrum, there is the perspective that this is because of speculation and people sitting on empty houses, owning them, if you like, as financial assets and waiting for the prices to go up so they can sell them again. Now, my cheeky response is that in different cities at different times and in different places, both of these explanations could be relevant. And our job, I think, is to try to find ways of trying to shed light on the problem. I don't think we know really what is the situation in terms of, ultimately, the situation in terms of speculation and financialization. And part of our future activities will be to try to get a better handle on that, working with member states to see just what the situation is. Last comment, if I may, and that is that when we look at the issues of supply, I think generally we, and I mean that in the largest sense, too often think in terms of just new construction. How many new buildings, how many new homes can we construct? And you see a lot of national housing targets, which, by the way, are often missed. We would like very much to underline the focus on repurposing, renovating, bringing buildings back into the housing stock. This plays, I think, back to what Dan Johansson always talks about affordable, sustainable, and quality. There are a lot of buildings which, with a few renovations, could really come back in. I was very struck reading the other day about what Gothenburg, or Göteborg, if I may try, has been doing in terms of repurposing formerly shopping centres on the outside of the city and bringing those back into the housing stock. If we're really creative, we can bring more affordable homes within the reach of our citizens. And then lastly, on financing, I hear people who say, yeah, if you get it wrong, throwing more money at the housing problem can just mean higher prices. But I think the purpose of the Pan-European Investment Platform is to provide a facilitating practical toolbox of ways in which different cities, different housing financing systems can use, for example, financial instruments to crowd more private money in. Again, it's not going to be a set of rules and requirements, but I hope a set of opportunities and ideas for people to take forward. That's the spirit in which we're really trying to bring to this European housing question from the European Commission perspective. Thanks again.
Thank you. I have a quick question before we open the floor to the public. Which other EU policies do you look at in general, which are not strictly speaking related to the housing sector and that can influence the housing sector?
That's a good question.
So
it's a very good question.
I can give a few ideas, but do you have ideas yourself, or shall I give suggestions?
Sorry, asking me or the panel?
Both.
Okay, well, let's go to the panel first.
It's just to kind of open a bit because we'll do it very quickly so that we can open the floor to questions. It's just like the three top EU policies that you think are important to enable access to housing.
I think one great concern is regional and rural politics and policy, because I mean, in
three points, three policies.
Okay, rural and regional policies.
Yes.
Because we have vacancies, we have many municipalities who need to renovate but can't afford to do it because of legislation and norms, and also they are facing deconstruction, tearing down apartments, and they need support for that. That's one, and I will sell there.
Marie, do you have any other policies that you follow closely?
No, I would also say that renovation, but not only in the. I think it's important that we can get renovations because we need it for the climate also.
So climate policy. So we have regional
climate policies. Yes, I think that we have a big stock that need to renovate, but also that you don't get the cost back on the tenants, so they can't afford to stay.
So that it's Fredrik, we're an internal market machine, competition.
Yeah,
do you have any suggestions?
You should stay out of Swedish housing policy.
But what do you think, for instance, of facilitating competition in the construction market? This is also something that the EU is good at, is fostering.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, that's
internal
good.
market.
The internal market, we can hire people from any country.
Exactly.
That's perfect.
So that's also a policy.
That.
Exactly. So it's just to say that there are different pillars within EU policies that can actually facilitate this reallocation within Sweden, having access to the right, I would say as well, employment policy. So this is why as well, Matthew will open to the public directly the questions now, if that's fine with you, because in a sense you work with so many services at the Commission.
Just to say, I mean, all of those comments are totally relevant. And one of the most fascinating things is that we've never had before a housing task force or a housing directorate general. But what we find is we're working with literally 18 different directorate general in all the different policy areas you described. So it is very much a coordinating effort, not a top-down thing, but we're trying to pull in different policies and encourage people to be as expansive in trying to find different ways of helping in the sector.
Thank you. So now we will take on questions from the audience. Carolina?
Hi, Carolina Skog from the Swedish Cities Missions. Mr. Baldwin mentioned the importance of including homelessness in this policy, but I've yet to hear more about it. Could you please elaborate on the issue of homelessness, both the panel and Mr. Baldwin, please?
Thank you. We'll take 2 questions maybe, so that Matthew can... Any other question?
Hi, my name is Louise Karlsson-Arning. I'm from a reporter at the magazine Alltinget. I have a question for Matthew, and it is if you are ready to take in the concerns about the state aids when you review the suggestions, or if that door is closed.
Shall we keep going to take a couple more, because these are very good questions.
Okay, speaking from a young perspective, I'm a student at KTH. That is a general question, but it's not just about young people wanting to live in centers. It's in general, how will you provide more housing for young people? I haven't heard that yet.
Hello, I'm also a student at KTH, so we're studying urban design and planning. So I'm a second year and also working on a thesis project. And currently, as an outsider from Sweden, and I also find this topic is very interesting, which is the housing crisis. And I'm also doing a thesis project. Like, I'm really interested in your idea on the social housing, which we try to make a solution about how to contribute to the society. And if I may later have a discussion with you, like, can I talk with you? Thank you.
Hi, also from KTH, Hilde van Son. I have a question about the internal competition, because as you said, the EU is very good at stimulating internal competition. At the same time, in a lot of European countries, the competition rules have caused issues in the social housing market, especially in keeping supply up. So I'm wondering how this is being addressed.
We have 5 questions.
That's quite a good selection. Let me have a quick stab, but I'd also again be very interested in the panel's views. Just firstly then on homelessness. I mean, I should have said a bit more in my remarks. Again, we're not coming the first onto this pitch, if you like. This is an issue which has been looked at the European levels, I mentioned, under the European Platform for Combating Homelessness. One of the things I think we and my colleagues in DG Employment who lead on this issue are very keen to promote is this idea of housing first approaches. And this, I think, is born in Scandinavia, by the way, and I know being very well implemented in Scandinavia. And the idea is trying to move away from a reliance on inadequate and rather costly temporary accommodation, and to really put the focus on getting people back into housing. And of course, this has an impact in most of Europe on social housing, and it emphasizes the continuum with the social housing policies. And of course, for people who have been struggling perhaps with mental illness or other issues of addiction, it's very important not to say, okay, here's your apartment, off you go, but to make sure that we're bringing with it associated social support and not leaving people on their own. But the results have been very positive. If you just look at the Finnish figures, since they launched their Housing First programs, they've reduced the number of homeless by 30%. They've reduced the number of long-term people by more than 35%. So these ideas are proven to work. So then the question is, how can we support those at the European level? And back to my theme of the day, by learning from each other, making sure that we support the dissemination of, if you like, housing first policies, not telling people this is what you have to do, but helping people, encouraging people, learn from each other. So I think there are things that we would like to take forward on homelessness, and my colleagues in DG Employment will also be addressing these next year in the forthcoming anti-poverty strategy. On state aids, and I think these issues came up in several of the questions. My colleagues this goes back to the previous question, how we're working with lots of different departments. My colleagues in DG Competition are running this. I think they've consulted twice on the policies, first on the principles and secondly on their proposals. I think those consultations have now closed, and they're in the closing stretches as we are for finalizing the state aids decision. I have to say, I think they've done an extremely good job of reaching out. And so I think I can assure you that your views will have been heard if you've responded in their consultation exercises. Once again, I put the emphasis on the facilitating role of this rule change rather than the sort of top down, you have to now do this, this and this. Issues facing young people. I'm delighted that you've got folks in here from the university community. We have to think. I think we have to be imaginative here. Another policy that's coming up, which I think will be very interesting, is the intergenerational fairness questions, which don't just point in the direction of doing more to help young people, but mostly they do. And I think, again, this is broader than what the Commission will do. The more we can think about in a systemic way how to combine increased investment in student housing, the more we can think about targeted measures that expand affordable rental and ownership opportunities, also encouraging ideas such as co-living spaces, intergenerational living. There's lots of things we can do. And last but not least, we're keen to try to support so-called alternative housing models such as the development of cooperatives and community land trusts. There are lots of ideas out there which could bring more housing to bear. I realise I've spoken too long, and I also realise I'm now meant to go to speak to my Slovenian friends. So I shall hop out of the discussion. Leave last to be with you. And thank you very, very much, everyone, for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Matthew.
Bye. We will continue the conversation.
Yeah.
Marie.
Yes, I think I will comment two things. First of all, about why I don't think we need social housing in Sweden. I think it's important that we stay with the tools we have, and public housing is a very good tool to make people live there. But it also you need public housing, but you also need other things, because we have a situation now with economic inequality. And in Sweden, we used to have housing allowances that a lot of people could take care of. But now we have housing allowances that less and less people could use. And if we had better housing allowances, more people could get into the housing sector. And the second thing is that landlords, both public and private, need to accept every income. Today we have landlords that don't accept socialbidrag. I couldn't find the English word for it, because if we don't accept that as an income, then you can't go in to the houses. So I think we have the tools. But we also have problems that we don't work with housing allowances. We don't have it as we used to have, but also that we have to accept every income. And also that not all municipalities build with all different kind of houses types. Some municipality doesn't build for tenants, for example. So I think work with the tools we have, but we also need to do changes, because it's not that the state doesn't give allowances to the housing market, but it's most of all to the home sector. We have ränteavdrag and we have also rotavdrag, but in the rental sector we have zero on that, and we have difficult with also bad housing allowances. So I think if we work with that tools, and if we work with our bostadsköerna, this is funny that I talk Swedish, but if we could do that, because right here in Stockholm, they have these rules that every third flats go to young people. And it works because a lot of people, young people that has been standing in line since they were 18 or 16, get a flat before they are 26. Not perhaps in the center city, but in outside city. So you can work with the tools you have today, but then you need to do it, and the politicians in municipalities need to work with that. And concerning young peoples, I think it's so important that we continue to build different kind of houses, and we do it with we thought as the tenants union that it's good that we had the investeringsstödet, because it made 50,000 new flats with lower rents. And I've been standing now for 11 years on these scenes, debating with Fredrik and so on, and everyone says, oh, we can build cheaper, but I don't see it. I see it when the state goes in with some subsidies or something like that. Then we build with lower cost. So it's also, I think it's important that the state are active, but we also need to discuss how could we lower the costs.
Fredrik, do you want to react?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so on the social, we don't agree on the social housing sector. I think, and to tie into, there's no time to answer the 5 questions, but I want to tie into the homelessness questions, because there are different problems. There are some with mental illnesses, and then that's not a housing problem. We need to work with the mental illness first. But there is a growing population where access to housing is the main problem, and access to housing for these people could be solved by social housing, instead of, as I said before, pretending that the general system that we have today, Marie said it's working. It's not working. It's not working for a major part of people in our society. They can't find housing. The waiting lists are way too long. And then you'll start working with, as the suggestion was here, I forgot to comment on it, specific solutions catered to, say, policemen or to nurses. But then the problem with exceptions, and the same goes with the youth waiting line that we have in Stockholm, is that more and more groups will demand exceptions, and sooner or later everyone has an exception, and then you're back where you started. So the only solution here is, deregulations where they're needed. Most people can afford their own housing. Some people can't. They need help. Mostly it's an income problem. We need to help them with incomes. But I think also that social housing is the viable way of trying to help those people.
Thank you. Martin, do you want to add?
Well, may I offer a middle way? No, but I think we could.
In short answer.
In very short, yeah. I think, as Lars commented here on the state aid rules facilitating changes, I think that's a very wise thing to say, because I think I know there are actors out there who wants to have the support to make it a difference. So even from my political scientist view, that the system is very path dependent and very slow, I think there are actors out there who are innovative and could use this support. I think it's very good that it's there. So, but to comment on the question of young people's entrance to the housing market, the intergenerational inequalities, and also the social housing system, I think the middle way is a feasible way forward that we could use. We have legislation in place that makes it possible to use exceptions, to have priorities and so on. So I think, could we isolate the group which are in need of better housing, who are unable to access? We could use with a selective instrument, but without abandoning the universal system. I think we could do that, but with or without the European state aid rules. So I think that is possible if there is a political will, and if there is a will among the municipalities which are in power. So I think there are tools out there which we could use and need to use. Just do it.
No, thank you very much. So what I learned from this session is that one, let's say, what is blocking a bit reform is maybe the political will. You all express this in different ways, you have different wishes, but it seems that basically, whether we go in a direction or another one, it's currently not moving a lot at national level, whether be it on having more supply of housing or liberalizing more, so it's not really moving extensively. So what I hope is that the fact that the EU debate is putting housing on the agenda, that this will help as well stimulate the discussions in Sweden, because it's a very Swedish issue, we all agree. There is a lot to grab from the different EU policies. It's a bit pick and choose. Huh? So if you're a municipality, maybe you would have access to EIB funding, European Investment Bank. So for those who are keen on financing, there are tools. For those who look at the construction sectors, there's the possibility now. There is, it's called implementeringsrådet, förenklingsrådet. We have what we call the omnibus, a lot of work on simplification now, where we can push upwards everything that doesn't work, that prevents markets from functioning better. But what I see is that everybody agrees that what we want is that everybody has access to housing. So thank you everyone for being here today, for making the effort to come to the representation on a Wednesday morning, and I hope we will continue the discussion in the months to come. And thank you again.
Alltid trevligt.